What's going on, people? Today I want to touch on the topic of God, right? And I want to break down um, the different understandings we have and kind of try to compartmentalize what we think God is and how we perceive it, and in my opinion, how we should perceive it. So the analogy I want to use, this is coming from a discussion that I actually had with my brother the other day, where I think the typical understanding, the more introductory, religious based type of understanding of God is more like onto a pool versus the more enlightened, in my opinion, broad spectrum understanding of God as the ocean. Right? So when you have a pool, it has many constraining factors when you think about it. So if you're getting ready, you got your, rubber ducky and your paddles or whatever you use in the pool. I don't know. The pool has pool hours, right? So you can't go jump in the pool whenever you want. The pool has hours. That's a constraint. The pool has a lifeguard, right? The pool has rules, no running, no food, no video recording. The pool itself has constraints where it's boxed in, right? It's this rectangle. And then within that, usually a pool has a fence that's even more boxed in. The pool has constraints on its depth, where there's like a 4 foot section for the kids or the people who can't really swim like that. Then it has like the deep end, but in order to get into the deep end, you got to take a test, right? Depending on what type of pool it is, whether it's a public pool, a private pool, is it this pool at a rec center, is this pool at an apartment complex? Each one of these scenarios comes with different constraining factors, right? So if you're at an apartment complex, you'd likely have to be a member of that complex or be a guest of someone who is, right? Public pool, there may be some type of fee you may have to pay. Again, it comes with hour constraints and things like that. Um, I'm really likening this notion of the pool minded approach to God as religion, classic religion, or classic dogmatic approach to spirituality and God in general. Now, I don't want my use of the word God to limit your perception of what I'm trying to communicate to you. I don't want you to perceive what I'm saying in purely a religious context. Um, we need to think of God as something bigger and broader. We need to understand God as something that is can even go into the vein of science, right? So for your own comfort, if you're uncomfortable or if you find that the word God is blocking you from perceiving what I'm saying, you can also think of God as electromagnetism, right? Um, Energy, spirit. You can keep the terms. You can say Jesus, God the Father. You can say Allah. All these terms are just placeholders that help our mind perceive something so vast, right? And I think there's a point where we need to elevate past these concepts and these frameworks. I think they are very useful, but more so um, as an introduction. I think the concept of God or the concept of the pool is something that is useful for more like a person that is a baby in their spiritual journey, someone who's at the beginning of their spiritual journey, right? Or even a physical child, right? So the same way we explain to a child the concepts of karma or you reap what you sow or your actions have consequences, how do we explain that to children? We give them stories. We give them allegories. We say, Santa blesses you because of all of the good things you did, right? With gifts. Or we say, monsters come and take things away, or you get a lump of coal from Santa because of being naughty, right? These are allegories to help a child, right? Someone at the beginning, someone who's at the introductory stages. But at some point, your training should extend and expand past the point of these tools, right? Because you can put yourself in this type of cycle that repeats itself of you just learning the introductory information over and over and over again, and you never expand past that. So now moving on to the notion of God as the ocean, we can clearly see that a lot of these parameters that I mentioned immediately go away. There's no hours to the ocean. There is no limitations. There is no pain. I mean, we attempt to constrain it. There are beaches that have limitations in hours, but I mean in terms of like the experience we have with the ocean itself, right? The ocean is way more vast. A person has reverence and respect for the ocean, you know, kind of like we do for our higher powers, whatever they may be. Whether that's you practice ancestor worship, you practice formal religion, you practice some version of both, regardless of what you practice, whether that's mindfulness, meditation, or anything on the spectrum, there is a level of reverence that you have for whatever that practice is. And some people could say for formal religion, some people could even say if we liken God to like parents and parenting, there is a level of fear, right? But that fear is related to the reverence that we have towards something so big, right? So as a child, you most likely had a healthy fear. There is unhealthy fear, right? But you most likely had a healthy fear of your parent, you know, for fear of consequence, for fear of disappointing your parent, right? That's the same thing when we have a ocean approach to the concept of God. And even within the concept of God, moving away from the pool paradigm, there's a hierarchy within that, right? So there are depths of the ocean that are yet to be explored. There are entities within the ocean that have yet to be discovered. And as we go deeper into the ocean, we understand that the pressure becomes greater and greater and greater, right? So your spiritual journey, if you free yourself from the pool-like paradigms, can be lifelong, right? Because you're essentially exploring the depths of what God really is, right? And in doing that, you explore the depths of your psyche. You explore the depths of your potential, right? So the deeper you explore through your spiritual practice, the deeper and the more discovery that can occur um, for your highest and best good. So the more you know yourself, the more you explore yourself, the more gems you uncover, the more skill sets you uncover about yourself, the different abilities that you are now able to access because of the depth you're willing to go, right? And that there's a flip side to that. So when we think about the deepness of the ocean, there's like fear that's associated with that. There are entities that are probably, you know, the movie Finding Nemo comes to mind where, you know, there's that scene where they're lost and there's that little light that what is it, Dory, the fish is looking at, and then you find out it's connected to one of those crazy looking type of entities. I think that is a good explanation for how spirituality and science, there's so much to it to be discovered. It makes no sense to attempt to place constraints within it unless the constraints that you are placing on it benefit you, right? So when we move away from these constraining factors and understand that there is a sliding scale, you know, there's the information that I have, there's the knowledge I have, there's the experience that I have, right? And that's near and dear to me. But the moment when I get new knowledge, new information, or a deeper perception, I'm responsible to either accept that information and elevate my paradigm, or I can reject that and hold faster to my current paradigm. And that's usually what you see with people who are still within classical religious paradigms, where they can be presented with new information and they choose to you know, close up and hold faster to the paradigm. And that's essentially the pool-like mentality where your priest who absolves you of your sins, you know, you pay money and the pastor somehow, you're a sheep of his flock and stuff like that. That's like the lifeguard, right? So if you can't really swim like that, if you're afraid of what the exploring the ocean really means, it's like if you're scared, go to church. If you're scared, go hop in the pool, right? The lifeguard there, he'll hold your hand, he'll, you know, help you out. Even think about the limitations on exploring the depths. In order to go into the deep end of the pool mentality, you have to take a test. You have to pass a test, so to speak. Now, if we think about our grandparents and great grandparents, what is the story we always hear of how they learned to swim? They just threw your ass in that joint. They just threw you in the deep end, right? Now, how true that story is and how many of us experience that can be different, of course, but it's important to realize how these constraining factors work. Where in the pool, it's always about some level of control, somebody benefiting, and you need to pass a test. You need to prove something. You need to pay something in order to receive the depth, right? And that can go into a lot of different directions in terms of like paying for higher education, but to stay within the scope, think about how within the pool mentality, you have to give something in order to receive the ability to move into the deeper portion of that pool. Whereas in the ocean, you don't need that. You just need to ride the wave. You just need to move out into the currents, and eventually you will experience the deeper part of the ocean. And that is more of the, in my opinion, an ascended approach you should take. And I think it gives really good indication of how you should approach your spiritual practice, whether that is through your meditations, whether that is through the practice of your core religion. So I don't want anyone who practices traditional religion to feel like I'm attacking or trying to say throw away religion. Religion has its purpose and it has its uses. And I wholeheartedly believe religion has depths to it. But the caveat I will make and emphasize is that the way it's currently practiced has set confines, like the pool. There is no depth to modern religion today. But again, that's a little bit outside the scope. My main point is trying to emphasize and describe how your relationship to God can be likened to a pool, or it can be likened to an ocean, where an ocean is something that contains millions, if not billions of lives, right? An ocean contains an ecosystem. An ocean is an ecosystem. So if we think about the concept of God as something we live inside of, it's a field, right? The ocean contains all of the land on the planet when you think about it. So if we think of God as containing every individual on the planet, it makes sense that our approach would be more likened to a surfer, where things come into your life and you're responsible for riding those waves, and you're responsible for navigating those currents, right? With a level of reverence. So now I won't use the word fear, it's more like reverence. You respect the ocean. If you into sailing and things like that, you respect that like them waves can get choppy. Tsunamis are a thing, hurricanes are a thing. There are positions you can be put in that can be considered dangerous, right? There are predators in the ocean and things like that. So we can't think of God as Santa, right? With a personified view where, oh, he just wants to give you things or he punishes you. We have to think of the ocean as an ecosystem, right? So that's why I bring up the notion of karma, where if you do this thing, there is an outcome that comes with it. Now, if you want to personify that outcome as a punishment, that's up to you. If you want to personify that outcome as a blessing, that's up to you. You can do that. But you're essentially the one that is making that decision, right? So in addition to God being a field that we live inside of, God is also something that influences and impacts the way we respond to stimulus, right? The way we are motivated, our habits, our energy mechanisms, our thought patterns, our psychology, our biology, right? Our energy signature, all of these things are components of God, right? So I'll talk about that. I think the episode of my podcast is A Drop in the Ocean, funny enough, where I think I kind of touch on how we are a drop in the ocean. So we have a piece of God inside of our vessel, right? So it's very, very important to perceive God or the all or spirit or electromagnetism, right? Or energy, scalar waves, whatever term you want to use to represent the higher being or the imperceivable, it helps to give it its respect and its reverence, and not to treat it like a pool, right? Which I think modern society has a tendency to do, to want to constrain and confine and limit. The first ones there, the first people there can kind of like set up limitations and ways for yourself to benefit at the expense of others and put yourself above other people. That's not how it works. And it's about time for us to really understand our spiritual practice. And I think one of the first steps it takes for is a lot of deconditioning and decluttering a lot of the things that we learned previously that may have had benefit in our youth, but definitely no longer serve us now, right? So I'm a big emphasizer of healing and self-care and things like that. I just wrote a book called The Four Elements of Healing and Self-Care, where I take an elemental approach, water being one of them, obviously, water, earth, air, and fire. Um, and maybe this is just a little breakdown of the water element and how mentally it's important to perceive your water as more expansive, right? So I talk about how you need to heal your water element in a bunch of different ways. So one of the ways you can do that is expanding your paradigm on what your water element really is. Your water element is less like a pool and more like the ocean. So that really gives you the opportunity, and it puts you in the driver's seat, and it puts you in a position of power to be able to realize that your personal energy is as expansive as the ocean, or you have a direct line of communication to an energy that is as expansive and all containing as the ocean. Now imagine if your paradigm about your emotional body or your water element was exclusively limited to the notion of a pool, right? Some boxed in, small, you got to put chemicals in it to keep it clean and all that type of stuff. If your paradigm about your emotional body is that limited and small, then your creativity will also follow in that way. Your approach, your thought patterns will be in that way, limited and confined and constrained, right? Your view about yourself and your emotional body, the way you express your emotions will be limited and confined, you know? So, again, it's really, really important to realize how you go about expressing your water element, and it's really also important to realize your connection to this broad element. So that's it. That's all. I just wanted to touch on this notion of the God as the pool and God as the ocean, and your connection to each, and really how it's important to understand your paradigm needs to be upgraded or can be upgraded. And check that book out, by the way. I think it'll be really helpful. It breaks down obviously the other three elements, but go ahead and check that thing out. I'll see y'all later.